It started like any other suburban morning, but the peace shattered when Karen Blackwell's voice cut through the air like a razor. Remove those ugly things from your wall right now, or I'll have you kicked out of this neighborhood. I almost choked on my coffee as I watched my husband Jake freeze mid sip. His eyes darted to the dozen bright orange decals plastered across our white front wall. They'd been there for months, looking like angry suns against our house, but I'd never seen anyone react like this before. Karen, our self appointed neighborhood queen, stood on our driveway, her hand raised like a judge delivering a final verdict. She was dressed in her HOA issued khakis and a polo shirt, her blonde hair tied back in a bun that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager." She had a clipboard in one hand, a ruler in the other, and she was measuring the decals with the precision of a bomb technician. Jake, calm as always, set his coffee down with a measured motion, his jaw tight. "Karen, I appreciate your concern, but those can't be removed. They serve a very specific purpose," he said. "What purpose?" Karen scoffed, her voice laced with disgust. "To turn our neighborhood into a construction zone?" I watched from the window, my heart picking up speed. There was something off about this whole situation. Karen had always been intense about the neighborhood's aesthetic, but now it felt different, desperate. She was ranting about destroying property values, but her words were trembling with something else. Fear? Or was it something deeper? "Those decals are part of a federal requirement," Jake continued, his tone controlled but firm. "I have the documentation if you'd like to see it." Karen's face twisted in disbelief. "Federal requirement for what exactly?" she spat, as if the mere suggestion was laughable. "Making our street look like a highway construction project?" But Jake didn't flinch. Instead, he gave her an unreadable look, as though he was hiding something. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could see the subtle tremble in his hand as he gestured toward the front door, hinting at some kind of secret. A federal requirement? What was he not telling me? As Karen stormed off, her anger echoing down the street, Jake stood frozen in the driveway, staring at the orange triangles on our wall. I couldn't shake the feeling that those decals weren't just ugly stickers. There was something more to them. Later that morning, I found myself standing outside, really looking at them for the first time. Up close, the decals weren't just random shapes. Each triangle was marked with a small black symbol, almost like a code, and they were affixed with industrial strength adhesive. This wasn't some temporary construction marker. These were serious. When Jake came home that evening, he seemed different, more anxious. I didn't press him for answers, but his behavior spoke volumes. As we sat down for dinner, I couldn't stop the question from slipping out. "Jake, what aren't you telling me about those stickers?" His eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw something there. Fear, yes, but also resignation, like a man who had been keeping a secret far too long. "Maya," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm in witness protection. Those decals aren't just safety markers. They're tracking devices. The U.S. Marshals use them to make sure I'm safe." My stomach sank. Witness protection? Jake's voice remained calm, but the weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. "I testified against Carson Industries 3 years ago. They were laundering money for arms dealers. People don't forget witnesses, especially when they're dealing with international criminals." My mind raced, but before I could process everything, there was a knock at the door. The police. Karen had escalated, calling 911 about the dangerous construction site on our property. The officer, a weathered man named Rodriguez, was clearly familiar with Karen's antics. But when he saw the federal documentation Jake presented, his demeanor shifted. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "these decals are protected by federal law. Tampering with them is a felony." Karen's face turned pale. "Federal law for stickers?" she squeaked, the words almost choking her. "This is a residential neighborhood. You can't just override community standards." Rodriguez's response was firm. "Federal witness protection supersedes local HOA regulations." As Karen stormed off, defeated but still plotting, I realized we had no idea what we were truly caught up in. Jake wasn't just hiding from corporate criminals. He was hiding from something far more dangerous. The next morning, Karen's campaign to destroy us escalated. Posters appeared all over the street, warning neighbors about our dangerous home. She doctored the photos to make our house look like it housed a nuclear reactor. By 10 a.m., Karen had called half of the city's offices, zoning, fire marshal, even city planning, demanding immediate action against us. Jake didn't talk much, but I could tell he was worried. He didn't want to admit it, but the fear was there, buried beneath his calm exterior. "She won't let this go," he said. "She's going to dig. And when she digs, she'll find things about my past that could put us both in danger." I spent the rest of the day digging into Karen's past, and what I found made my blood run cold. She wasn't just a neighborhood busybody. She had a history of forgery, false accusations, and a bizarrely high number of domestic disturbance calls to her home. But what really unsettled me was the mention of her late husband. He wasn't mentioned as her ex, but as her late husband. Why was he referred to in the past tense? Then Mrs. Chen, our elderly neighbor, came to us with a warning. "Karen tried the same thing with me 3 years ago," she said, her voice trembling. She demanded I tear out my rose garden because it violated her precious aesthetic rules. When I refused, she sent fake inspectors to my house 5 times in 1 month. "She's dangerous, Maya. She doesn't just want to control the neighborhood. She'll destroy anyone who stands in her way." The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. Karen wasn't just trying to enforce HOA rules. She was a predator, and we had become her next target. That night, Jake finally broke. He took a deep breath and began to confess things he'd kept hidden for years. "My father, Daniel Thornfield," he said, his voice barely audible. "He worked for Carson Industries, too. He wasn't just an employee. He was their enforcer, the one they sent when things went wrong. He killed people, Maya. I was the one who found Robert Martinez's body, and I called 911. I sat there in shock as Jake's story unfolded. He had turned in his own father, testifying against him in court. His testimony had sent his father to death row. And now, Karen was threatening to expose that very past, trying to use it to destroy Jake. But what Karen didn't know was that Jake had already faced the worst of it. He had already paid the price for doing the right thing. She was just an obstacle now, and I wasn't about to let her ruin our lives. When the blackmail demands came, $5,000 at first, then $10,000, then $25,000, I wasn't scared. I was furious. Karen had crossed the line, and she was going to pay. The final blow came when Karen, desperate to remove the decals herself, was caught on camera destroying federal evidence. We live-streamed the entire thing, and within hours, federal agents swooped in. The FBI had been waiting for someone like her to expose herself. As Karen was arrested, I felt a sick sense of satisfaction. In the months that followed, our neighborhood began to heal. Mrs. Chen took over as HOA president, and the real community started to form. People who had once been divided by petty disagreements were now united. The roses Mrs. Chen had fought to keep became a memorial garden for victims of domestic violence. And the neighborhood that Karen had tried to control now thrived with real connections, not fear. But the scars remained. Jake still struggled with his identity, trying to live without constantly looking over his shoulder. Yet, as we planted new flowers in the garden and watched Timothy, Karen's adopted son, reunite with his real parents, I knew we were moving forward. The threat that Karen had posed wasn't just a threat to our safety. It was a reminder of how quickly power could corrupt, how easily it could be used to manipulate, and how the truth always had a way of coming out, no matter how much someone tried to bury it. And in the end, it was our community that saved us. Not from the criminals outside, but from the one who had been hiding in plain sight all along.